The Galactic Council of the High Lords had finally come to the consensus that the human race was, without question, the most dangerous species ever to exist. It wasn't their technology or their warfare, it was something much more fundamental. And it had taken them decades to realize it. Humans had a single terrifying trait that no other species in the galaxy had ever possessed. They didn't know how to stay mad. For centuries, the High Lords had watched the humans closely. They'd observed their wars, their rebellions, and their global conflicts. They'd listened to their speeches, their songs, and their endless debates. And at first, they thought the humans were just another primitive species destined to destroy themselves, like so many others before them. The galaxy was littered with the ashes of such civilizations. What made humans so different? It all began with the encounter between humans and the alien species known as the Vikari. The Vikari were feared across the galaxy for their brutal efficiency in war and their unyielding pride. Their empire had stretched across 10 systems before their first contact with humans. Their warriors were feared by all, and their battle tactics were studied in military academies throughout the universe. When they first encountered humanity, they expected the usual. The humans would bow before their might, or at the very least, they would cower in fear. But instead, the humans did something strange. They laughed. The Vikari had no sense of humor. They had never encountered a species that could so easily laugh in the face of danger. They considered this a sign of disrespect and issued an ultimatum. The Vikari's leader, Lord Zarek, transmitted a message to Earth that would forever change the trajectory of human history. Humans, the message boomed across the planet. You are to submit to Vikari rule, or we will annihilate your species from existence. This is your final warning. The human governments didn't take the Vikari seriously. They laughed again. The sheer audacity of the Vikari's demands was absurd. They weren't just insulting humanity, they were underestimating them. And that, as the Vikari soon discovered, was a grave mistake. Humanity responded to Lord Zarek's threat not with fear, but with a series of bold and ridiculous statements. News outlets, social media, and even the highest-ranking military officials started making jokes at the Vikari's expense. Don't make us mad, Zarek, one viral meme read. We've got nukes and we don't care what you think of them. The more the Vikari threatened, the more humanity laughed, the more they mocked. Lord Zarek couldn't understand it. No other species had ever responded to their threat with mockery. It was unheard of, and as time passed, it began to gnaw at the Vikari warlord's mind. The Vikari were used to conquering civilizations with their might, but humanity refused to be cowed. The Vikari decided they would make an example of Earth. They gathered their entire fleet in the Alpha Centauri system and began their approach to Earth with terrifying precision. It was supposed to be quick. The Vikari would wipe out humanity in a single, flawless strike. What they didn't account for was the sheer chaos of human ingenuity. In the hours before the Vikari fleet arrived, humanity mobilized its entire military. The world's governments abandoned their differences and united under one banner: survival. Nations that had been rivals for centuries set aside their quarrels to focus on a common enemy. Humans weren't unified by fear. They were unified by the need to prove something. The Vikari underestimated the human resolve, thinking it was just bravado. But the humans were deadly serious. They didn't panic. They didn't scatter in terror. They didn't even call for help from other alien species, as other planets would have done in such a dire situation. Humans knew they could handle this. They had done it before, against insurmountable odds. The Vikari fleet came into range, and the first shots were fired. The Vikari expected an easy victory, but instead, the humans unleashed hell. Earth's forces, aided by a rapid series of technological innovations born out of desperation, turned the tables. The Vikari warships, once impervious to attack, found themselves crippled by human-made weapons, some of which were entirely unexpected. The Vikari had underestimated humanity's ability to improvise, to invent on the fly, to adapt. They didn't anticipate the fierce resourcefulness of a species with everything to lose. Lord Zarek watched in horror as his fleet was torn apart, one ship at a time, and as the Vikari forces began to retreat, humanity sent a final message. It wasn't a threat or a warning. It was simply a message that read, "Don't make us mad." The Vikari were humiliated. They had believed themselves to be the apex of power in the galaxy. But now they were running. And they would never forget the humans who had made them flee. But that wasn't the end of it. The galaxy soon realized what had happened, and it wasn't just the Vicari. The ancient and powerful species that had ruled the galaxy for eons began to take note of humanity's unpredictable nature. And when they did, they realized something terrifying. Humans were not just a threat in terms of military might, they were dangerous because they had no fear of power. They had no hesitation to stand up to something much bigger and stronger than themselves, even in the face of certain destruction. And more importantly, the High Lords of the galaxy finally understood why humans kept saying, "Don't make us mad." Because when humans got angry, when they were pushed too far, they did not just fight back, they fought back with everything they had, using methods and tactics that no one could have predicted. It was this unbridled ferocity, this unrelenting determination to stand their ground, that made humans terrifying. The universe hadn't learned soon enough that to make humanity mad was to risk their utter destruction. As the Vicari withdrew from their failed conquest, the High Lords convened in secret. They realized that humanity's potential was limitless, and they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the very species they now feared. The galaxy was about to learn a very important lesson, and it was one that no one had ever dared to teach before. The universe had at last realized why humans kept saying, "Don't make us mad." In the aftermath of humanity's astonishing victory over the Vicari, the galaxy held its breath. The High Lords of the Universal Council, once untouchable and feared, began to realize that their reign had come to an end. The message from Earth was clear, and it resonated across every corner of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer the weak, primitive species that had once cowered in the shadow of the great empires. They were something new, something unpredictable, something capable of unimaginable destruction. It didn't take long for the other galactic powers to react. The Zorthian, a race of towering beings with psychic abilities, were the first to move. They had long held a monopoly on telepathic warfare, and their mind shields were the stuff of legend. They had never met a species that could challenge them until now. The Zorthian sent an emissary to Earth, not to negotiate, but to understand how humanity had managed to break through their telepathic defenses during the Vicari conflict. The human mind was supposed to be unfit for direct psychic combat, incapable of shielding itself from advanced mental influence. The emissary, a cold and imposing Zarthan named Harold Vor, arrived on Earth under the guise of diplomacy. His species had long since grown tired of being feared, and they saw humanity's recent victory as a challenge to their supremacy. They couldn't afford to let humans gain any more power. Harold Vor's task was clear: discover the secret to humanity's strength or eliminate them entirely. The humans, ever pragmatic, welcomed the Zorthian to their planet with open arms. They were used to visitors by now, after years of sporadic contact with other galactic species. The public relations campaign was flawless. Humanity knew how to turn any encounter into an opportunity, even if that meant dealing with a race like the Zarthans. "We don't want to fight," Harold Vor said, his voice echoing with an eerie calm that sent a shiver down the spine of everyone in the room. "But if you continue to resist, there will be no choice. We will make you comply. Look, buddy," a human representative, General Joseph Andrews, replied casually, "I'm sure you're used to getting your way, but if you're here to threaten us, it's not going to work." Andrews leaned back in his chair, his face a picture of insubordination. "If you've learned anything from the Vicari, you should have figured out by now that we don't really care who you are or what you can do. Keep pushing and you'll find out what happens next." The Zorthian emissary's eyes flashed a warning, but he didn't press further. He knew that to push too hard would mean alienating humanity completely. They had no idea what drove humans to act with such boldness, but Harold Vor could see that it wasn't a bluff. The entire room felt the weight of his words, but not a single person flinched. The human species had found its resolve, and they weren't going to back down. A few weeks after Harold Vor's visit, the Universal Council convened for an emergency session. The Zorthian had reported back with their findings. Humans weren't afraid of psychic manipulation. They had an immunity to it, something the Zorthian couldn't explain. Worse still, they had discovered that the humans didn't have any shields at all. Their resistance to mind control, however, wasn't due to natural defense mechanisms. No, it was because humans simply didn't care. Psychic influence was useless on a species that refused to be influenced. The High Lords quickly realized that this was a problem. In all their years of rule, they had never encountered a race that actively resisted control. Every species, no matter how powerful, had at least one weakness. Their minds were malleable. The Vicari, despite their pride, had underestimated humanity's ability to defy conventional tactics. But it wasn't just the Vicari now. The Zorthian had been humbled, and other powerful species in the galaxy were growing nervous. The council debated for hours. The Vicari's defeat had shown them that brute force alone would not work against humanity, and the Zorthian failure demonstrated that psychic manipulation was useless. Humanity was unpredictable, and that was the most terrifying thing of all. The council needed a new approach, one that could subdue the humans without making them even more dangerous. But then, an unexpected voice spoke up. The Eldon, a species known for their mastery of technology and knowledge of ancient galactic lore, made a proposal. Perhaps we should look beyond force and mind control. The Eldon representative, a sleek and silver-skinned being named Cal, said, "We've watched humanity for long enough to understand that they have something none of us possess, an almost reckless self-determination." The Eldon had always distanced themselves from the politics of the galaxy, preferring instead to focus on discovery and research. But now Cal's insight was considered invaluable. "What if we offered them a challenge?" he suggested. "A challenge?" Lord Zarek of the Vicari sneered. "And what challenge would that be? Do we provoke them further?" "No," Cal replied, his voice calm and deliberate. "We offer them something they cannot refuse. We give them an arena, an opportunity to prove themselves. We ask them to test their limits, to see if they truly believe they are unstoppable. They might be dangerous, but they are also prideful. Let us see how far their arrogance can take them." The council members exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know what Cal had in mind, but the idea of testing humanity's resolve, pushing them into a contest where their very existence would be at stake, seemed like the only option left. They had to test their mettle before deciding how best to handle the human threat. The challenge was set: the Universal Games. An ancient ritual used by the High Lords to settle disputes between civilizations would be humanity's trial. Only those who succeeded would earn the right to continue existing in the galaxy, and only the strongest would be allowed to make decisions about the future. The games would be the ultimate test, but humanity, never one to shy away from a challenge, would soon find themselves in a fight for their very survival, not just against the Vicari, the Zorthian, or any of the other powerful species, but against something far worse: the weight of their own pride. And the High Lords, for all their planning and manipulation, had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the most dangerous trait of all: human hubris. The Universal Games began, and for the first time in their galactic history, a species from Earth stood on the precipice of competing with the galaxy's most feared powers. The challenge was simple, or at least it appeared that way to the High Lords: a series of trials that tested every skill a species could possess: military strategy, psychic ability, technological innovation, and raw combat prowess. The games were designed for one purpose: to see which civilization was worthy of standing among the galaxy's elite. Humanity wasn't supposed to win. They were supposed to be humbled, forced to admit their inferiority, and brought to their knees before the High Lords. But humanity, true to form, didn't take the games seriously at first. The human representatives, led by General Andrews, approached the Universal Games with their usual mix of pragmatism and defiance. They didn't care about the rules, the traditions, or the other species watching them. They cared only about one thing: winning. And when humanity entered the first trial, they did something that no one, not even the High Lords, had expected. They didn't just compete, they redefined the rules of the game. The first trial was a test of strategy, a galactic chess match played on a scale that dwarfed anything the galaxy had ever seen. The High Lords had designed it to favor the more advanced civilizations, those with centuries of experience in warfare and diplomacy. But the humans didn't play by the rules. They hacked the game, using their technology to rewrite the algorithms that determined the outcomes. The High Lords were outraged. "This is cheating," Lord Zarek bellowed. But humanity didn't care. They weren't interested in playing by someone else's rules. They were interested in winning. And so, they continued to defy expectations, breaking every rule, bending every tradition, and pushing the limits of what was considered possible. They didn't just survive, they thrived. By the end of the Universal Games, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had won. They had outmaneuvered the Vicari, outsmarted the Zorthian, and outperformed every other species in the galaxy. The High Lords were forced to admit defeat, and humanity, for the first time, stood as equals among the galaxy's elite. But even as the galaxy celebrated humanity's victory, the High Lords knew that their mistake had been a grave one. They had underestimated humanity's resolve, their ingenuity, and their ability to turn any situation to their advantage. And now, they faced a new reality, a galaxy where humans were no longer the underdogs, but a force to be reckoned with. The High Lords had hoped to contain humanity, to control their rise to power, but instead, they had unleashed a new era, an era where humanity's influence would stretch across the stars. And as the High Lords watched the humans celebrate their victory, they couldn't help but wonder, what had they done? For they had made humanity mad, and the galaxy would never be the same. And as the human representatives returned to Earth, victorious and unbroken, they sent one final message to the galaxy, a message that would echo across the stars for generations to come. Don't make us mad. And this time, the galaxy listened.